previously on Sodor, the modern years.
Good evening, sir. Are you working late again?
Yes, and I overheard your story. I must admit this is the first time I've heard all of it.
Let me guess. Your father was sworn to secrecy about the whole thing?
Essentially, yes. Now, the Ministry of Defense approached me last year about decommissioning their base up there. At the time, I declined. I was concerned about moving munitions along the railway.
And now, sir?
Now I suspect it'll be safer if they were removed. I had no idea how much material was up there. Yes, I think I'll need to make a phone call tomorrow morning.
I hope this Ministry of Defence lot are careful.
Hello, Fred. Nice to see you again.
Have we met before?
Yes and no. I used to work up at the Scarlowby Slate Quarry until about 1993 or so. Just the rear part of it.
Are you Corporal Harris by any chance? I have heard mention of someone by that name who worked up there.
That's right, but you don't need to stand on ceremony. Just call me Harris. It was Adeline who told you about me, wasn't it? It would have been back in the day.
Yes, we were just discussing her recently. Our number 7 was wondering why he shares her number.
I see. Good sort, is he?
Oh yes.
Glad to hear it.
I see you two have met.
Indeed, sir. Is this about decommissioning that quarry?
Yes, it will take a lot of work, and so Harris has come to help out. His knowledge of the quarry will be invaluable.
I see.
I'm afraid only you and Rusty will be able to help out at first.
Indeed. Now, pay attention, Fred. That quarry was used to store munitions and other, shall we say, materials back in the day. Our job is to remove all of that and do whatever tidying up is needed. We can't risk any sparks, not until it's been confirmed inert.
Inert?
You know, so that it wouldn't hurt a fly.
I see.
You two can discuss details on the way up. These sappers need to get up there so they can start work.
Righto, sir. You're rather quiet for a diesel.
Who told you I was a diesel? My hood's filled with batteries for my motors.
You're electric?
Less risk of sparks that way.
You lot really take that seriously, don't you?
We've got good reason to. For example, there was a disaster at a big city in the United States back in the 20s. 2 tugboats got into an altercation while loading munitions. Sparks flew and half the dockside went up. We'd rather avoid such an incident.
And we're going into a situation like that?
Neither of us give off sparks. Besides, that's only really a danger when they're being loaded.
Makes sense.
Fred replied. He fell silent, contemplating what he'd heard. They soon reached the quarry and approached the gate into the section used by the Ministry of Defence.
Stop! Fred! We need to stop!
Both engines surveyed the scene before them. Most of the quarry lay underwater.
So this is what you call inert, then?
You could say that, yes. That creek up the back must have burst its banks. We'll need to drain all this to get the munitions.
So, that's you done for the day, then?
Unfortunately, yes. Would you mind helping me to a siding? My batteries are getting a little low.
Of course.
Fred replied. He pulled Harris back, then shunted him and his trucks aside. The sappers disembarked and started assessing the damage. Fred made his farewells and left to return to his work. Over the next couple of days, Harris and the sappers drained the water and repaired the tracks in the quarry. Before long, they were loading trains with munitions and other material. Adolescent Peter Sam had been assigned to help out. Given that the munitions had been soaked for some time, there was no risk of them igniting. The engines picked up vans loaded with the old munitions, as well as the flat cars loaded with things called nuclear flasks. After leaving the quarry, the engines ran directly to Crovan's Gate. There, the munitions and material were loaded onto standard gauge trucks to be taken away from Sodal. One evening, Atlas was leaving with the last of the munitions trains. As he headed down the line, the trucks grew heavier. An unpleasant yet familiar odour drifted up from them.
Driver?
Yes, I smell it too. We've got a hot axle. Atlas's driver applied the brakes. The train stopped just before the Old Iron Bridge. Atlas's driver climbed down to check the trucks, and Atlas found himself quite alone.
Hello? Who's there?
Help me. Please help me.
Who's there?
Help.
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, it's just you, driver.
Of course it's me. There's nobody else up here.
Are you sure?
Aye. Now I've sorted that hot axle. We need to get moving. We've already wasted enough time. Atlas didn't reply. He just got moving as quickly as he could. After shunting his train, he joined the other engines in the shed. Normally, he was rather chatty, but tonight, he barely said a word. The next morning, Atlas was up at Lakeside, helping some workmen maintain the track.
Is there something bothering you, Atlas? You barely said a word last night.
There is. You won't laugh if I tell you.
Of course not. You looked pretty shaken, just like when Duncan saw his ghost all those years ago.
I think I heard one. A ghost, I mean, when I was coming back last night.
While crossing that old iron bridge?
Yes, we had to stop for a hot box. How did you know that?
Because that's where I heard it too.
What? When?
Back in August of 1976, as I recall. We were in the middle of a heat wave then. Even the evenings felt like midday. Anyways, I was taking an early goods train up to Skarloey town one morning. It was mostly food, and we had to take it up early before the heat spoiled it. I reached that old iron bridge just as the sun was rising, and like you, I had a hot box on one of my trucks. We stopped, and my driver went to fix it, and while I was waiting, I could have sworn I heard Adeline's voice calling out for help, but my driver didn't. I thought I'd imagined it, to be honest. Reneus and I had been talking about Adeline the previous day because her driver had just passed away. As his former colleagues, we were all saddened.
I understand.
So, when that happened, I just thought it was because I had Adeline on my mind. But now you've heard the same thing.
Yes, and I'd never even heard of her until you told us about her the other night. Have any of the other engines heard her?
No, not that I know of. Actually, maybe I do, Atlas. Maybe. Leave this with me. I need to speak to an engine about a prank.
With that, Skarloey departed. Skarloey didn't get a chance to talk to Rusty until that evening, when all the engines had finished their day's work.
Good evening, everyone. I've got something I need to ask all of you. Have any of you ever heard a voice calling out to you near that old iron bridge on the lakeside route?
Skarloey, where are you getting at?
Skarloey and Atlas explained about the voice which had called out to them.
Is it possible you could have imagined it? I mean, both of these encounters did happen just after we'd been discussing Adeline.
That had occurred to me, Duke, but I feel there is more to it than that. Rusty, I think you may have a story to tell us. You know, that one you told Duncan several years ago.
Oh, not this boiler sludge again.
What's this?
Oh, some silly ghost story he made up to scare me back in the late 90s.
I didn't make it up. My driver heard it on the radio a few years earlier.
You didn't make it up?
No, I didn't.
How did it go, Rusty?
Well, it's been a few decades since I last heard it. I'm not sure if I can remember the exact words.
A long time ago, a little engine was returning home. It was a misty, moonlit night. As the engine crossed the old iron bridge, he suddenly lost control and plunged over the side into the swamp below. He was never found again. But many workmen will tell you that when the moon is full, they have seen the little engine trying to get home, but he never reaches the other side. Did you think I'd forget that sort of thing?
Well, no. That sounds like what the MOD said happened to Adeline.
So, who told that story then? Rheneas and Sir Handel were the only ones who knew of it.
I've not told anyone. Certainly not a radio show.
Don't look at me. I haven't told anyone either.
Yet someone did, Falcon. They knew enough to be able to describe that accident in detail.
Then they may know what actually happened to Adeline. Perhaps that would explain those voices at the bridge.
So, how do we find them?
We could start by asking Harris. He's part of that military lot, isn't he? And he was here back then.
Do you think he'll say anything? I mean, he certainly knows how to keep a secret. We didn't even know he was here last time.
Well, it can't hurt to ask. I'll do so at the quarry tomorrow.
Thank you, Peter Sam. Please let us know how you go.
Early the next morning, Peter Sam arrived at the MOD section of the quarry.
That's not going to be too much for you, is it?
No, I can handle that. Your sappers have been busy.
The rain over the last few days put a damper on things. We've got to work hard to get it back on schedule.
Peter Sam glanced at the sidings. They were almost overflowing with trucks.
Would it help if you had more space? I'm sure our controller wouldn't mind if you brought some of these down to Skarloey Yard yourself.
That would be helpful. I'll ask my CO to make arrangements.
May I ask you something?
Go on.
There's this story that's been going around for a few decades now.
Peter Sam began. He recounted what Rusty, Skarloey, and Atlas had said in the sheds last night.
Rusty's ghost story does line up with what Rheneas and Falcon told us. Someone must have told that story to the radio people.
Well, they shouldn't have. Details of those operations are classified for a reason.
It's not that detailed a story. I take it that it wasn't you then.
Of course it wasn't. Besides, I didn't see anything that night.
So, you were there then?
I was in my shed at the back of the quarry, recharging. All I heard was some shouting.
Oh. Is there anyone else who may have known about it?
Aside from the soldiers and locomotive crew, only Goose. But I can't see how he'd know those details.
Who's Goose?
We all had code names for operational security.
Code names? Oh, you mean something like 007?
Yes, so the paperwork didn't say we were involved. I was called Raven, and Adeline was Swan. Goose was the other engine involved.
Another one of us?
Not one of your lot. One of the big ones, who brought our cargo up to your interchange for Adeline to collect. Never met him myself.
That couldn't be it then. How would one of the big engines see what happened to her?
That's exactly my point.
Peter Sam departed, lost in thought. While that hadn't been as useful as he'd hoped, at least he'd gotten that code name out of it. Goose couldn't have witnessed Adeline's accident. The big engines couldn't get up to the quarry. But maybe he would be able to point them in the right direction. While tenuous, it was the only lead they had. Perhaps the code name matched the engine, like how Raven matched Harris's livery. Peter Sam had encountered geese before, near the lake. They were loud, brash birds who made a horrible honking noise. That did remind him of one locomotive in particular.
Driver, are we due to meet with James at all today?
I don't think so.
I'll just have to keep an eye out then.
Peter Sam replied. He would have to mention this to the other engines too. Perhaps they could think of something. When he reached Croven's gate, Peter Sam spoke to the thin controller and arrangements were made. A few hours later, Duncan arrived in Skarloey Yard to find Atlas and Harris there. The Ministry of Defence engine couldn't stay to talk. He had to get back to work. As he left, Duncan watched him closely.
Now that's a proper phantom. Here for years without a sing, running on our rails with nary a word. None of this voices from under the bridge nonsense.
I know what I heard, Duncan. It wasn't imagination.
Then you've fallen for a prank. Take my advice. Dinna let it bother you too much.
Instead of replying in anger, Atlas just puffed away. Trains ran smoothly over the next few days. The skies remained clear and the sappers at the MOD quarry worked hard to make up for the delay. With Harris bringing trains down to Skarloey Yard, the backlog was soon cleared, and the decommissioning of the quarry was back on track. While this was going on, the Skarloey railway engines tried to figure out which of the big engines was Goose. It wasn't James, as Peter Sam had suspected. The red engine knew nothing about it, nor did any of the other mainline engines. With that line of inquiry gone, they didn't know where to look next.